The music teacher that lost his voice. Paul obviously loved his job and seemed like he must be a good teacher, but unfortunately his body had a hard time holding it all together. He was a relatively high-strung guy who spent his days teaching teenagers how to play a variety of instruments, and his evenings helping his wife look after their baby and toddler. He spent his time doing the things he loved doing, but due to his personality, the things that he loved doing were also inherently stressful for him. Paul was a ball of tension who came into my office about once a month with a new symptom manifested from the same problem, his underlying stress level. As a teacher, Paul diligently created lesson plans and managed to learn to play 10 different instruments well enough to stay ahead of his students and keep them progressing along. He seemed to enjoy all facets of teaching music, but he clearly internalized how stressful it was for him to be on display in front of a group of teenagers all day. Musicians endure a lot of physical strains to their bodies with sustained postures and repetitive movements, but they also willingly place themselves in scenarios that involve a lot of performance-based stress and anxiety. Paul experienced a daily dose of low-grade emotional stress as a teacher with anxious tendencies, combined with the repetitive strain of using his voice to teach and sing and his hands to play piano, guitar, trumpet, and clarinets. One week Paul would lose his voice, the next week his hands wouldn't work very well, sometimes his jaw locked up, all based on the level of tension he held in his body. In talking with Paul, I learned how passionate he was about music and how much he loved his family. As soon as I started to move and physically feel his body, I felt how guarded and tense he was. Paul was a global bracer. His stress resided in his muscles in the form of an increased tone that limited his flexibility, compressed his joints, and generated a lot of aches and pains. He wasn't trying to tense and brace, it was just his body's natural reaction to remain in a guarded state. His nervous system seemed to have too many amps running through it most of the time. The nervous system is the electrical wiring to the muscular system in our bodies. It is responsible for regulating the resting tone of our muscles. Our muscles shouldn't be limp and flaccid or held in an overly contracted state. Ideally, they rest somewhere in the middle, so they have the capacity to stretch or contract on demand. Physical and emotional stressors can subtly throw off how the nervous system regulates muscle tone in a localized area and or globally in the body. Paul managed to have an issue with both. His anxious tendencies caused him to brace globally, while his musical tendencies required him to brace parts of his body while repetitively moving others, which resulted in a variety of pains and dysfunctions. The ability to talk and sing is controlled by a series of muscles in your chest, neck, throat, and face. A skilled singer will be able to manipulate and coordinate all these muscles into making beautiful sounds, just like a skilled athlete moves with ease and precision. Paul was a skilled singer, but had trouble regulating the tension in his muscles because of his stress levels, and would lose his voice from time to time, or have his jaw tighten up so much that it hurt just to talk. He was also a talented pianist, but when he started developing tension in his shoulders and neck, his forearms would tighten up and he would lose the dexterity of his fingers. Paul had the skill to do his job, but his body parts didn't always cooperate with him. IMS dry needling was a magical torture for Paul. He hated every minute of it, but could feel and see immediate changes to his bracing muscle tone after every treatment. He was naturally hypersensitive to the point that simply grabbing one of his muscles between my fingers would cause him to strongly tense his whole body. Poking a needle into a sensitive muscle will tend to cause it to contract, which is the point of the treatment. Paul knew that, so he would try and squirm and brace every single other part of his body to distract from what was happening. He found the process horribly uncomfortable, but experienced me bringing his voice back, making his hands work, and getting his jaw moving, all by releasing tension from his muscles in a 30-minute appointment. From experience, I've witnessed that when you start poking and prodding in the areas of people's bodies that they tend to hold a lot of their stress, you will commonly get a lot of emotional reactions from people. Paul was no exception. I was treating the physical manifestation of internalized emotions as I treated his taut muscles, and quite often as I tricked his nervous system into letting go, he also started crying. His emotional release was both a sense of relief his body was working again, and a pent-up level of his weekly unaddressed stress coming out all at one time. After going through the process of IMS enough times and listening to me explain what was happening in his body, Paul understood and accepted how his emotional and physical well-being were intimately tied. It didn't change how sensitive he was, but he slowly understood the messages of his body and started reaching out for help more proactively before body parts went offline. Once he understood the basics of why things were hurting, I continued trying to manage his body with IMS and shifted my education from anatomy to basic parenting advice to help him navigate his role as a husband and father, the two other significant ongoing stresses in his life. Paul's pain and dysfunctions were real, but nothing was physically or pathologically wrong with him. He experienced physically what he didn't have the capacity to process mentally. The tension he held in his muscles physically compressed nerves and created real restrictions in his body. I was able to help him regulate until he learned to regulate himself. Low levels of insidious stress over a long period of time can have the same negative effects on a person's nervous system as a more acute traumatic event, but the former can be harder to recognize for individuals and the practitioners. As a society, we need to try to acknowledge the context of the ill health we experience and make equal attempts to address it as much as we address our symptoms.